This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good morning. We're coming in right now with breaking news related to the impeachment investigation of President Trump. The Department of Justice and the White House have just released the transcript of the July 25th phone call between President Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelensky, where they discussed Joe Biden and a possible investigation into former Vice President Biden. I want to bring in our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas, who's at the Justice Department right now. You've seen the transcript, Pierre. You've been briefed. Tell us what you know.
George, the bottom line is that the President of the United States did, in fact, speak with the President of Ukraine and make a direct pitch for the President of the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son. Here's one of the quotes that jumps out at me. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son, quote, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General, that would be great. The Attorney General he's referring to is Attorney General Barr. The President invokes the name of Attorney General Barr and also Rudy Giuliani, who he said would be looking into the matter. He said that both men were going to reach out to the President of Ukraine and ask him to get started on this. And George, the President of the Ukraine indicated that he was going to investigate the matter.
Yeah, they had a fairly extensive conversation about this. The President of Ukraine talked about wanting to meet with Rudy Giuliani. The president mentioned that he wanted to enlist the Attorney General in this. What has the Attorney General said about the fact that the president mentioned him in this phone call?
Well, George, a rather extraordinary set of events took place after the Inspector General got word of this whistleblower complaint. We now know that the Inspector General referred this matter over to the Justice Department for a potential criminal investigation involving possible campaign finance violations. The Justice Department did a review, an internal review involving the National Security Division and the Criminal Division, and they ultimately concluded that there was no violation, potential violation of the campaign finance laws. They also say that Attorney General Barr was not involved in knowing about this request by the President of the United States, that he never talked to the President about this particular request, and also that he never spoke with Rudy Giuliani about this request either, George.
And Pierre, in the course of this phone conversation, the President does not only mention Joe Biden, the possible investigation of Joe Biden, he also talks about this CrowdStrike issue, which of course that was related to the hacking of the DNC emails back in 2016, and asked the President to look into that as well.
He did, George. He seemed interested in wanting to know what role the Ukrainian government might have played in that. Also, George, he mentions in a very derogatory way Special Counsel Bob Mueller. You remember that this is one day after Bob Mueller appeared on Capitol Hill. He talked about how incompetent Bob Mueller as well, George.
And finally, Pierre, they also discuss investigating the woman, the Foreign Service officer, who had been the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine up until the time that President Zelensky was inaugurated.
He did indeed. He had some very negative things the president did to say about this ambassador, George. And I think the other thing that's interesting here is we got a little bit more detail about the whistleblower and how all of this came about. In the Office of Legal Counsel memorandum about this whole matter, they point out that the whistleblower supposedly heard about this conversation, this phone call between the president and the president of Ukraine from White House officials.
Pierre, finally, before I let you go, we do have the president saying, as you mentioned in the phone call, that he would like to have the Attorney General call the president so he can get to the bottom of all this, saying you have a lot of assets. The Attorney General is saying he never spoke with the president about any of this?
The Attorney General is saying flat out, he never spoke with the President about this. He never spoke to Rudy Giuliani about this. But the first time that the Attorney General became aware of this was when the Inspector General and the DNI's office contacted the Justice Department and raised these concerns.
Okay, Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. I want to bring in our Chief White House Correspondent, John Carl, for more on this pretty extraordinary bits of information packed into this phone call. Of course, the top headline, the President clearly asked for Joe Biden and his son to be investigated.
And I think this will be seen as even more damning than anticipated, George. The President is explicitly asking for help here. And look at the words he is using. The White House will say there was no threat, there was no quid pro quo. But the President first says the United States has been very good to Ukraine. And then he says, I would like you to do us a favor. And the first favor is to look into the CrowdStrike issue you mentioned. And he says, he brings up this server. It's not clear what server he's talking about. I can think of only one server that's been in the news regarding all this, the Hillary Clinton. Clinton server, and he says the server, they say Ukraine has it. I don't know where that's coming from, but he's asking for an investigation into that.
He also says that cryptocomic, your economy will be getting better at a time when we know he had been withholding
some $400 million in aid. So I think that this will be more explosive than even than anticipated. And it's interesting that the White House decided to put this out, and we were being told over and over again, this won't be so bad once people see it, because this looks damning.
And it's a multi-tiered effort. I mean, remember when Rudy Giuliani first said he was going to go to Ukraine, there was an uproar over that, and he in fact had to pull out the trip. But what we see here is Rudy Giuliani involved, the president saying Bill Barr is involved, although he denies it, and of course the direct request from the president. And
the president bringing up the attorney general more than once. I mean, he is saying, my attorney, I will have my attorney general, I will have Rudy Giuliani contact you. He is explicit here.
Dan Abrams.
So I think one of the critical things is, what has the president said about it up to this point, right? The president had initially talked about the possibility that this was a discussion about trying to root out corruption, right, in Ukraine, trying to ensure that the money was going to the right places, et cetera. There's almost nothing about that in this letter. I mean, in this transcript. This transcript is almost, you can say, largely about the personal agenda of the president. I mean, when you read through it, the majority of what the president is talking about is with regard to personal agenda items. The CrowdStrike, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. He repeats again and again.
The ambassador.
Yeah, the ambassador.
Who was on President Obama's side, according to
right. Talk to my attorney general, et cetera. And so when you're talking, again, the most important point, though, is the Biden piece, right? I mean, you can say that the Hillary Clinton piece is inappropriate, shouldn't have done it. But when you're talking about trying to get information about your potential 2020 rival, you're now crossing into the potential legal issues. Right? You're now talking about the possibility of influencing an election. And that's different than just looking back.
Let's break that down a little bit, of course. And we should remind everybody, this is the day after Robert Mueller testifies on Capitol Hill. And there's a difference between what is illegal and what is impeachable. To begin with the legal, first of all, as Pierre reported, you had this criminal referral from the Intelligence Inspector General sent to the Justice Department, cleared by President Trump's Justice Department.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's almost meaningless, right? I mean, the reason you have a special counsel or an independent counsel is because you don't want the president's appointee judging the president on something this important. That's why when people said, well, Bill Barr came to his own conclusion about the Mueller report. Well, the whole reason that Robert Mueller was asked to come in was so the attorney general wouldn't have to make those sorts of determinations. And here you are seeing the attorney general apparently, or at least the Department of Justice, making a determination on these very important questions.
And deciding to not turn over to Congress the complaint. Because like you said, George, and this is important, there is a difference between what is illegal and what is impeachable. And this gets into that question. And the president brings up himself that Mueller had just testified. And this is a very interesting part of the transcript. He said, as you saw yesterday, that whole nonsense ended with the very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance. I mean, first of all, extraordinary that he's bringing up Robert Mueller in a conversation with the president of Ukraine. But that was all about whether or not there had been conspiracy, collusion, whatever word you want to use.
The Russia investigation in the first place.
Jonathan's right. I think this is worse than I think people expected. Meaning, I think when we were on Chris Christie earlier this morning, the suggestion was, they're telling us this isn't going to be that big a deal.
Or they might have been vague.
Right. They're so maybe he asked him a little bit something about Joe Biden. I mean, this is unambiguous.
I would like you to do us a favor.
Let's bring that to Mary Bruce on Capitol Hill. I know they're just getting this now on Capitol Hill. Mary, any initial reaction?
Well, George, this is likely to only add fuel to the impeachment fire here. Democrats are now just getting out of their weekly meeting. All of the House Democrats have been huddling with Nancy Pelosi, and they are now walking out to a sea of cameras and reporters asking for their reaction to this. Democrats are likely going to pounce, of course, not only on the fact that we now see that the president asked a foreign leader to help investigate his political rival, which, of course, Nancy Pelosi has said was the tipping point here that led her to finally move to impeach. But, George, they're going to have a lot of questions questions about the attorney general and the fact that you see the president offering up essentially his attorney general to help investigate his 2020 rival here. Look, Democrats here on the Hill have long questioned the attorney general and the independence of this Justice Department. Democrats often refer to him as the president's personal attorney for the way that he handled the Mueller report. I suspect they're going to want to speak to the attorney general. And George, I would not be surprised also if they have a lot of questions about the fact that the Justice Department is now in a position of trying to adjudicate a matter that now so clearly the attorney general was directly involved in.
Well,
like this.
I think they will likely say that is why they're pursuing impeachment proceedings, because it doesn't belong in the Justice Department right now. I want to bring in Terry Moran on that. And Terry, as I bring you in, I want to put the letter up on the screen one more time. Those two sentences about Vice President Biden. He says the other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Whatever you can do with the attorney general.
Well, those sentences will be the battleground for the coming impeachment, because I think it is fair to say that the Democrats are going to move forward on the basis of this alone, and there's more to be found out as they develop the facts in committee hearings. And the question will be before the country, are those sentences, are the president's actions in the national interest or in his own personal political interest? He will argue corruption is a huge problem in Ukraine. It's part of the problem with giving money to Ukraine. It ends up in the wrong hands. President Obama was aware of that. The EU is aware of that. And he will argue that Vice President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, who was on the board of directors of a major energy company, which is involved in some of that corruption, was a legitimate subject of national interest. And that's what he's talking to the president of Ukraine about.
But I understand that'll be the defense. Does it pass the smell test once he explicitly mentions the name Joe Biden?
Well, Joe Biden was involved in the dismissal of a prosecutor. That prosecutor actually had dropped the investigation of the company that Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, was on. So that'll be hashed out. But there's no question that the impeachment will be, is the president operating cynically, corruptly, abusing his office for his personal political gain here, trying to pressure this leader to help him in an election? Or is he pursuing the national interest? That will be the question.
Terry raises a really important point about the timeline here, right? The prosecutor in Ukraine, who was eventually dismissed, was investigating this company Burisma in 2013. For actions that happened in 2013. Hunter Biden joins the board in 2014. And so there's no evidence at this point that Hunter Biden was part of the initial investigation.
Well, that's point number one. Point number two is that the prosecutor who Joe Biden was pushing on, this was part of an international effort that Biden was a part of, an entire administration-wide effort to take this prosecutor out because he wasn't going after corruption cases hard enough.
Correct. And you go back and you read some of the media coverage from back then of when the Ukrainian prosecutor was eventually pushed out. And it's talking about all this international pressure, how much pressure had been put on Ukraine to get rid of him.
Look. I mean, it didn't smell right. You had the vice president's son making tens of thousands of dollars a month with a retainer, and you have the vice president. There's an appearance problem, but just look at this. Why would that be of pressing concern right now? What would happen in 2014? Why would this be a pressing concern to be a central part of his call with the president of Ukraine? And there's a very important point here, too, George, is when the president asks him to do this investigation. If you look, it comes right after, in this transcript, right after President Zelensky brings up the issue of military help from the United States. And then the very next sentence from the president is, from President Trump, I would like you to do us a favor, though. I would like you to do. So you're asking for something, but I've got a favor.
I got something I want from you. Mary Bruce, we're getting reaction from the House Speaker.
Yeah, George, our reporter John Parkinson just caught up with the House Speaker as she was leaving this meeting. She says she has not read the transcript yet, but she stressed that no one, not even the president, is above the law, saying the fact is the president of the United States, in breach of constitutional responsibilities, has asked a foreign government to help him in his political campaign at the expense of our national security, as well as undermining the integrity of the election. That cannot stand. He will be held accountable, she said. said, George.
Okay, let's go back to our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas. And Pierre, let's try to take a step back right here. One of the things revealed in this letter is, as I said, a multi-tiered effort involving the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. The president says his Attorney General, William Barr, and then he's making these direct requests to the president of Ukraine. I know the Attorney General has said he didn't know anything about this phone call, didn't know the president was invoking them. Have they made any judgment about whether it was proper for the president to be discussing this with the president of Ukraine?
They have not made any judgment about that. So far, the Justice Department solely looked at whether it was a campaign finance violation, George. But one of the things that jumps out at me when you look at the transcript is the degree to which Giuliani is playing a role in this. He's not a member of the Trump administration per se, but he's clearly playing a role where the president is invoking his name. And get this, George, the president of the Ukraine insists that a member of his staff has already been in contact with Rudy Giuliani and that he was perfectly open to furthering this investigation with Rudy Giuliani, George.
John Carl, as we look at this now, as we get this, and we still haven't seen the whistleblower complaint, I want to pick up on what Mary was saying. She thinks this is going to fuel the calls for impeachment. Hard to imagine, and you already have 200 members of Congress, more than 200 members of Congress for impeachment before this transcript comes out. What happens next?
Well, look, first of all, you've already had the Speaker of the House come out and basically make the argument not for an impeachment process, but for impeaching the president. And Adam Schiff this morning, the Democratic chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said based on what we already know, he should be impeached. So I think even before this comes out, the House was clearly moving in the direction towards impeaching the president, and it's hard to see how this does anything but not add fuel to that.
One of the questions, Dan Abrams, is going to be how broadly do they define articles of impeachment if indeed they decide to pursue them?
Right, and it's something we talked about before, which is that in previous recent impeachment proceedings, Nixon and Clinton, they went broad. They went for abuse of power. There were numerous counts under each of these sort of broad buckets. And here you've got to believe that they're likely to try and be more narrow, that they're likely to try to be able to want to convince the American public that they're not overreaching. The question becomes, is it overreaching or is it overdue? And I think that they're really going to have to prove to the American people it's overdue.
And Terry Moran, it is really setting up a classic clash. It's going to involve constitutional principles, political principles, national security, the president versus the executive, the president, the executive branch versus Congress.
Absolutely, because the next step is the patient development of facts and evidence. And to do that, they will have to get the Attorney General before Congress. They will have to get the Secretary of State before Congress. Rudy Giuliani says Mike Pompeo asked him to go to Ukraine. And so while we have the transcript, what the Democrats will want to do is bolster the evidence in this transcript with witness evidence and others. And among those people who would have been listening into this call as a matter of routine, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, the former National Security Advisor, he'd be called to testify too.
It appears that we are going to be getting the impeachment hearings with potential public interest that didn't materialize after the Mueller investigation. Again, one more time, the White House has released the transcript of the July 25th phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky, where he did indeed ask the Ukrainian president to look into Joe Biden. We're going to have much more during the day. The president is going to meet with President Zelensky later this afternoon. We'll be back for that. I'm George Stephanopoulos in New York.
All right, thanks to George and the team in New York. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Continuing coverage here on ABC News Live of breaking news right now from the Justice Department. As you heard George say there, the Trump administration has released a 5-page memorandum of a telephone conversation, the conversation at the center of this newly fueled impeachment fight over President Trump. We have the whole team breaking it down, what it means and what's next in this process. And I want to bring in our senior justice reporter, Jack Date, who's here. You were over at the Justice Department this morning, Jack. Let's take a big step back for viewers. So much has been happening so quickly the past 24 hours. We've seen the headlines, now this impeachment effort underway. But what does this document tell us that we didn't know yesterday?
Well, it tells us a lot. It tells us that the president asked the president of a foreign power to investigate his political rival and his family. And it's stunning in how direct the president is. And he comes right out of the president of the Ukraine telling him he wants to buy missiles from the United States.
And let's get into some of the details here, Jack, as we see on the screen here one portion of that call. This is a phone call. It was about a 30-minute phone call back in July, just the day after Robert Mueller testified up on Capitol Hill. President Trump, according to the memo, having this phone call from his personal residence inside the White House, and he tells the Ukrainian president, who he was phoning, to congratulate on his recent election. He says there's a lot of talk about Biden's son. President bringing up his rival unprompted, bringing up Joe Biden first. He said that Biden wanted to stop the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. Whatever you can do. The Attorney General of the United States would be great, the president says. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So here we have it. The president, in one example, offering to invoke the Justice Department of the United States to look into his political rival. Mary Bruce is our senior congressional correspondent, because so much of this is being digested right now. Mary, I know we just heard from Speaker Pelosi. She's about to dive into this document. What else are we hearing from members?
Well, Devin, the quick reaction from Democrats here is that this is even worse than they would have thought. Not only does this show that the president brought up his political rival and asked a foreign leader, the Ukrainian president, to investigate Joe Biden, but that he is offering up the help of his attorney general. Democrats here on the Hill say that in particular, the fact that the president seems to be enlisting his attorney general, William Barr, into this investigation for political purposes, that sparks a lot of questions. The fact that the White House put this out thinking that this may have provided some answers, it seems to have done the exact opposite. If anything, this is only adding more fuel to the impeachment fire here on Capitol Hill. Everyone is now pouring through this transcript and what it means, but I suspect you will see growing calls to have the Attorney General come up and answer questions yet again here. And of course, Devin, remember the history of all of this. Democrats are already very skeptical of this Attorney General for his handling of the Mueller report. They have long questioned the independence of this Justice Department. Those questions are only likely to deepen.
Yeah, this is a major piece of the puzzle in this impeachment game that the Democrats are playing now. Mary, I want to get your take on what the Republicans have to say about all this. They've been strangely quiet the past 24 hours, although we did just hear from at least one Congresswoman, Debbie Lesko of Arizona. I want to get your reaction to this.
What Speaker Pelosi did yesterday really was the worst we've seen yet, where she announced an impeachment inquiry without any evidence, without seeing the transcript of the phone call at issue, without seeing any details from the supposed whistleblower. And when you think about what that does, both from the perspective of our constitutional obligation and from the perspective of our national security, it ought to give every American grave concerns that they are dealing with this in a way that is absolutely such a flagrant disregard of their constitutional responsibility.
Okay, there was, of course, Lynn Cheney of Wyoming, Mary, but is that going to stand for House Republicans? Can they simply say that Pelosi is doing this too fast now that this document is out there?
Yeah, it will be really interesting to see how they keep this up. I mean, Republicans' line in the last 24 hours has been that their Democratic colleagues are rushing to judgment here, that they are simply playing politics, especially since Republicans, as Senator Cheney was pointing out, hadn't seen the transcript, hadn't seen the whistleblower complaint. I think Democrats are going to be quick to point out and argue that this transcript actually undercuts that argument. They do, of course, both sides, we should note, want to see the whistleblower complaint. You had Senate Republicans yesterday joining with their Democratic colleagues in passing a resolution urging for that full complaint to be released. But Republicans are in a tough spot here. It will be very interesting to see how they defend this. But one thing that I suspect they will continue to hammer away on is this concept of a quid pro quo. We've heard Republicans over the last several days say there's no evidence of a quid pro quo when it comes to halting that military aid, hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine that came just the week before this phone call. And in the transcript, the president didn't directly bring up that specific military aid, though there was an implicit reference to U.S. support for Ukraine. Democrats say, look, it doesn't matter, quid pro quo or not. The fact here is that you now see that the president was asking a foreign leader to help investigate his political rival.
All right, Mary Bruce, thanks for that. We're also keeping our eyes on President Trump at this hour. He's still in New York City for the UN General Assembly. Jack, he is holding a meeting right now. We can see with some world leaders. He's got a number of those on his docket today, including a meeting with the Ukrainian president later this afternoon, of all people.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. The sort of interactions that he's having in New York and everything that's happening in this city are just historic. We've not seen anything like it. It's stunning, and reading these words and seeing how this conversation plays out is stunning. But we also have to take a step back and realize how we got here, right? So, this all started because a whistleblower went to the Inspector General of the intelligence community and said, "Hey, I heard something, and it might be a problem." And they started looking at it, and what they found was that it's possible that this could be a campaign finance violation. And so they referred that to the Justice Department. In addition, they have some obligations under the law, if it is truly a whistleblower, that they must report that to Congress. Now, they had some problems with that. As you know, as we've been talking about for the last week, they weren't allowed to bring the whistleblower to Congress or give him a path to go to Congress himself because it was deemed not part of the intelligence community, meaning the president is outside the intelligence community technically.
Technicality of sorts.
Yeah, effectively, but the law wasn't written for him. And so, now we've seen sort of the extraction of this really, really stunning document.
And we may still yet hear from the whistleblower himself as these negotiations are underway. That we'll get into that much more, Jack. I want to go to Pierre Thomas, though, your colleague, our Chief Justice Correspondent over at the Justice Department. Pierre, thanks for sticking around. You actually were in the room this morning as officials were first unveiling this to a select group of reporters. You were allowed to talk to some Justice Department officials about this. I want to pick up where Mary left off and how Republicans are approaching this. No quid pro quo. But there are indications in this call that there was some implication of a possible exchange.
Well, again, that's going to be up to people to read and come to their own conclusions about. But I think, notwithstanding what the Republicans are saying, the dominant thing that you get from reading this transcript is that it is no doubt that the President of the United States asked the President of Ukraine to investigate his political rival. It's categorical, it's clear, it's unambiguous. He also repeatedly invokes the name of Rudy Giuliani, his personal attorney, as being someone who would be involved in working this particular angle. He also invokes the name of Attorney General Bill Barr as someone who would be involved, and that the President's direction would be calling the President of Ukraine. That is going to be the issue that Congress and the American public are going to have to resolve. Is that okay?
They sure are, Pierre Thomas. Thank you so much. Let's go bring in Terry Miranda in the conversation. Terry, help us unpack a little bit what the president is even driving at with Joe Biden here. Obviously, the president's action is the big story today, but there's a lot of people that may be wondering, well, did Joe Biden do something wrong? What was President Trump allegedly chasing here in Ukraine with Joe Biden? Fill us in on that side of the story.
Well, they are going to hear a lot about Joe Biden and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and Ukraine. And here's what went down. So Hunter Biden joined the board of directors of an energy company called Burisma way back in the early 2010s. And it is that position for which he made a lot of money, which is at the heart of President Trump's accusation. President Trump says Burisma was part of the ridiculous corruption that engulfs Ukraine, and that there was a Ukrainian prosecutor, whose name was Shokin, who was going after that corruption. Joe Biden has publicly bragged that he got Shokin fired. Now, from the Biden perspective and the EU perspective and the perspective on the ground in Ukraine, Shokin was part of the problem. That prosecutor was not pursuing any corruption investigations, including into Burisma. But there is this kind of fevered conspiracy theory that Biden got that prosecutor fired to help his son, Hunter Biden, who was on the board of directors of that company until this year. That will be one line of the president's defense, that he was pursuing corruption in Ukraine, the corruption that he will allege was the Biden family participated in, of which there's not a lot of good evidence. But he'll say that's what he was doing. So this transcript, the president will argue, he is being president. He is operating in the national interest. It's in the U.S. national interest to stop the corruption of Ukraine because we give them a lot of money. and it's being wasted in that corruption. So he'll say he was doing his job here, not trying to attack a political rival.
Of course, using the resources of the presidency, the attorney general and his personal attorney to that end have raised a lot of red flags amongst a lot of good government experts. Terry, thanks for that breakdown. I want to bring in one of those experts on the phone. Elaine Kmark with the Brookings Institution is the director of the Center for Effective Public Management. She studies these issues of the appropriate behavior of our bureaucrats and elected officials. Elaine, thanks for joining us. Talk to us about what may be problematic about deploying Rudy Giuliani, the personal attorney of the president, and the Attorney General of the United States to chase down some alleged misbehavior by the former vice president and his son in Ukraine.
Well, it is probably going to fall within what the constitutional scholars would call abuse of power. The President of the United States is not supposed to use the apparatus of the United States, whether that is the Justice Department or their ability to hold back money for foreign aid, in the pursuit of their own political goals. This is the first time that we are hearing anything like this. No president that we know of has ever done anything like this, and it obviously violates not only laws about who can conduct foreign policy, it also violates all the norms of the presidency, and it clearly seems to fall within this question of high crimes and misdemeanors, which is impeachable in the Constitution. There is no dispute here over the facts, so that's why the Republicans saying, oh, this is terrible that they've started this inquiry without an investigation. The facts are not in dispute, which was not the case in Watergate. It took 2 years before the tape was uncovered that had Richard Nixon abusing the power of his office to stop an investigation. It took 2 years in Watergate to get the facts out. Here, the facts are already here. The president has admitted to the facts. We have a transcript that has them, and it is now a question that goes before the United States Congress whether or not this is appropriate behavior of an American president.
That is for sure. Elaine Kmark with the Brookings Institution. Thank you so much for that. It's now 10:30 in the East Coast here. Thank you for joining us on ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Jack Date, our senior justice producer. Terry Moran, our chief national correspondent, is with us as well. Jordan Phelps. Full team coverage here. Breaking news just about 30 minutes ago, the Justice Department here in Washington released a 5-page memo of a telephone conversation, the one that's at the center of this impeachment controversy involving President Trump. We're breaking down what's in that phone call, what it means right now for the president and our politics. And I want to bring in Jordan Phelps to the conversation for how the president is reacting, because he's up in New York City right now, Jordan, trying to conduct some foreign policy, meeting with world leaders. He's there all day today, but he's also been active on Twitter. Give us an update on his reaction to this phone call transcript.
Yeah, Devin, the president is trying to do this business of foreign policy here at the United Nations, but this is being overshadowed. This is sort of just the beginning of what we can expect to see through this whole battle over this whole agenda of the president's is now going to be completely overshadowed by this. When we get back to Washington, the White House had wanted to move forward with getting his revised trade deal with Canada and Mexico approved. There was talk of moving on gun reform, of moving on drug prices, all of those things, Devin. It's hard to see how any progress is made on those when we get back to Washington. But this morning, President Trump laying into this on Twitter. His first reaction is, will Dems now apologize? The president is still saying that this was a perfect call, got them by surprise. But Devin, as we've been talking about from reading this memo now, this by no means clears the president. White House officials have been making the case to me that this would be a total dud. Devin, that is not the case. It's likely only to embolden Democrats in their effort toward impeachment. The president also quoting a Fox News anchor who says that Democrats have been looking for a way and a reason to impeach President Trump since he first got into office. And the president goes on to say that there is no reason. So, Devin, of course, this all developed very quickly over the last week, this story. This isn't what we expected just when the week started, Devin, but this has moved quickly, but still no surprise here, since this is obviously something that the president has in many ways been expecting since he first got elected. Devin, the president also retweets Doug Collins. This is an argument that until the full House votes to start a formal inquiry, there actually isn't a formal inquiry underway. This is an argument I've also been hearing from White House officials privately. They're going to be downplaying this, making the case that nothing has actually changed here, that this needs to go to the full House floor. It's unclear that that is the case, that they actually need to do that full House vote. But, Devin, this is going to be part of the White House's argument going forward, that nothing has really changed here, that Democrats are overplaying their hand, and that the president is not actually being formally impeached.
All right, Jordan Phelps, our White House reporter in New York, thank you so much. Stand by. Jordan, let's bring Terry Moran back into the conversation, because he's an experienced reporter on the issue of impeachment, has covered them, one at least, before. Terry, let's pick up with what the point Jordan was making there, and one that we have heard in some corners of Washington the past 24 hours, that not much has changed, that these committees that Nancy Pelosi talked about yesterday have already been investigating the president. We know so many of these facts, as Elaine mentioned a short time ago on the phone already. So what is different here? What did Pelosi's announcement yesterday signify? How does that turn us?
Well, first and foremost, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, a constitutional officer and the leader of the Democratic Party in Congress, has committed herself personally and her authorities to the pursuit of an impeachment inquiry. So it's going to happen. What is unusual, though, and what Jordan is talking about, is why 6 committees that are already kind of investigating whether foreign leaders are using his hotel rooms to pay him off. And by the way, that's mentioned in the transcript, too. So President Zelensky says, you know, I can't wait to stay at Trump Hotel. I mean, arguably, that's an Emoluments Clause violation. But why 6 committees? I think the Democrats have to be careful. They do have a boy who cried wolf problem with many Americans. There are many Democrats in the Congress and in the country who've wanted to impeach President Trump since the day he got inaugurated, on everything from Russia to firing Jim Comey to Stormy Daniels to his hotels. This, however, what's different is we now have the president's voice on this transcript talking about using the powers of the presidency to go after a political rival. Now, he will argue it was for the national interest. And I think the next steps must be that some of those committees need to develop more facts around this transcript. Rudy Giuliani needs to testify. Perhaps Attorney General Barr, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former National Security Advisor John Bolton. These are all people who can help us understand the truth of the matter. Was the president going after a political rival? Or was the president trying to do the business of the United States? There may be other evidence that can be developed. The whistleblower complaint may be based on more than just this transcript. So more facts, more evidence, more witnesses. That's the next step. Why do it through 6 committees? It's hard to say. She may change her mind on that.
Well, I think on Terry's point, those 6 committees already have ongoing investigations, and some of those investigations have been stymied by White House efforts to litigate and prevent the disclosure of certain information, like the president's tax records. That's going to continue, but with the weight of a constitutional prerogative in play, will the courts look at that litigation differently and weigh that in determining whether or not things like tax records have to be provided to the Congress?
And it is sort of surprising that the White House, in spite of all that stonewalling in the face of those investigations over the past 2 years, have turned almost on a dime with releasing this transcript, which is in its own right unprecedented. We are now sounding like we may hear from this whistleblower as well. Let's bring Jordan Phelps back into this, because, Jordan, you've been talking to White House officials, you've been talking to the campaign. What changed here? Why was it simply the public pressure, the political pressure? Why did all of a sudden they make this move?
Devin, what appears to have changed is the clarity that this particular case offered House Democrats. Nancy Pelosi said it was this call and the fact that it showed the president directly trying to influence a foreign leader to his own political benefit that really here changed the calculus for Democrats. Devin, we know that Nancy Pelosi has been very measured and very reserved in going down this path, but this really changed the calculus here. It is true we do not have a sense that the public is fully with this at this point. Previous polling has shown that there's not necessarily a ton of support for going down the road of impeachment. But what we see here is the Democrats moving ahead with their leadership as representatives of their respective constituents, saying instead of putting their finger up to the wind to see where the mood of the country is, they are saying this is egregious enough that now it is time to move forward, Devin.
Yeah, at least 200 Democrats now in the House have backed Nancy Pelosi's impeachment push. We're also getting some new tweets from President Trump trolling Nancy Pelosi of sorts and some of the comments that she had made back in the 90s around the impeachment of Democratic President Bill Clinton. Let's put those up if we have them. The president saying there's been no president in the history of our country who's been treated so badly. Common refrain. Democrats are frozen. Hatred. They get nothing done. This is another witch hunt, of course. Also, I believe, putting out a video of Nancy Pelosi. Terry Moran, you know, we heard so much from the White House and from Republicans on the Hill ahead of the release of this document that there wasn't going to be much to see here. But I am struck by a portion at the bottom of page 2. I want to get your reaction to it and help us decipher it. And the top of page 3, let's put it up, where it does seem that there's a very unusual exchange between the Ukrainian president and President Trump. The Ukrainian president says we're almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes. And President Trump jumps in and said, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country's been through a lot. Ukraine knows a lot about it. I'd like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. Certainly sounds like the Ukrainian president was offering to buy American military goods. The president said you could do that, but first, do me a favor. That does not look very good.
I think you're absolutely right, Devin. Those 10 words, I would like you to do us a favor, though. Those are the crucial words in this document. What do they mean? Are they related to the personal political interests of the president or the national interests? Because you're right. The president of Ukraine says, we want more U.S. weapons. Remember, they're fighting basically a civil war, a Russian-sponsored civil war out in the eastern part of the country. And let's pause for a moment. 13,000 Ukrainians have been killed in that war. This is life and death. So he's asking for help. And the president says, yeah, I would like you to do us a favor, though. And he talks about, first, the CrowdStrike server, where that has to do with the 2016 election and Hillary Clinton's campaign. Second, Joe Biden and his son. I would like you to do us a favor, though. That is what I think people are going to focus on. And as far as Republicans on the Hill are concerned, I think the most striking political development so far happened yesterday when the Senate voted 100-0. 52 Republicans joining the 48 Democrats. You can't get the Senate of the United States to vote 100-0 on the fact that it's Wednesday, right? And they voted 100-0 on a non-binding resolution calling on the president to release the entire whistleblower complaint. That is saying something about how seriously even the most partisan Republicans in the United States Senate are taking their responsibility to look at something that might be based on this transcript and perhaps other facts and evidence that can be developed, an abuse of his office.
Yeah, that portion, Terry, you talk about was so troublesome to the whistleblower. That's how this all got started. Came forward after reading or hearing that portion secondhand.
The timing of this, though, is also just incredible. I mean, this is the day after Robert Mueller has finished his testimony on Capitol Hill, and that was really just sort of the punctuation on a 2-year saga of investigation. And really, the White House at that point should have breathed a sigh of relief and thought, hey, we're in the clear. The very next day, the president engages in conduct that appears to be the very thing that triggered the Mueller probe in the first place, which is interference by a foreign nation into our election system, effectively. And, the other part of this, there's an ongoing investigation at the Justice Department into how the Russia probe initially was predicated, how it started, right? And part of that has to do with the Ukraine. That matter has already been under review by a U.S. attorney up in Connecticut, and this additional information has now been thrown in his lap as well to continue to review.
And it's almost deja vu all over again as well. We're just getting some more calls for the recusal of the Attorney General once again because Attorney General Bill Barr is named in this call.
Right, but the Justice Department says they looked at whether he was conflicted and determined he was not. And
they will face Democratic criticism of being their own policeman.
They're going to have a lot to answer for.
Right, they sure will. And in fact, we're just hearing from the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee who will lead this impeachment effort. He's the one who's already been investigating President Trump, of course, the Russian ties, but also now will serve as sort of a clearinghouse of all the evidence that's gathered by the 6 committees. He just tweeted, he said, the president dragged the Attorney General into this mess. At a minimum, AG Barr must recuse himself from this investigation. Jack, and I was struck by, you alluded to it, but at the Justice Department today, they seem to be going way out of their way to make clear that the Attorney General is nowhere to be seen. He's not speaking on this. He's not putting out a statement on this. He didn't know about the call. He doesn't want to have anything to do with this.
Right. He says that he didn't find out about it till weeks after the call. He's never talked to the president about it. None of the actions that the president proposes that the Attorney General be a part of ever took place. And, and also another part of the Justice Department looked at whether or not the referral for a potential campaign finance violation had anything to it. They determined that wasn't a violation of the law. Again, Congress is going to want to know more about that in their analysis that went into it.
And we know that the Trump campaign is spinning today's developments as well, just out with a statement saying there's nothing inappropriate here. The Trump campaign raised $250,000 in 15 minutes yesterday after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced her plans to do impeachment. I want to bring back in Elaine Kmark with the Brookings Institution. She's the director of the Center for Effective Public Management, a lawyer. Elaine, I want to ask you about Rudy Giuliani, who's been sort of an unusual figure at the center of all of this, freelancing, if you will, for the president and foreign policy out front in Ukraine, named in this phone call. What liability might he face in this probe?
Well, it's an interesting question that we'll have to see, and we'll have to see how far his dealings went. It is not legal for private citizens to participate in the conduct of foreign policy of the United States. And this is something that the president seems to have trouble grasping, which is that he's not dealing with for his own personal prosperity here. He's representing the entire United States of America. And that's why this is the issue that has created a tipping point around impeachment. Those 6 investigations, they've been going on and going on, but this is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back because of the total inappropriateness of the president's behavior and, of course, related to that, Rudy Giuliani's behavior.
We will see where that goes. As you say, Elaine Kmark, thank you so much. At the Brookings Institution, let's drop in now on the Senate floor here in Washington, where the Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is now addressing today's developments. Let's listen in.
Executive provided a remedy to Congress should the executive attempt to subvert or violate the Constitution of the United States. We are not yet at the stage where any judgments can be made one way or the other. But I remind my colleagues today that if the day should come when we are called upon to carry out our constitutional duty, history will judge whether we did so faithfully or not. History will judge if each of us acted as a solemn juror of democracy who placed fidelity to the Constitution and our system of government above the narrow considerations of partisan politics. Now, on another issue, not directly related, but with the same cause, with the same worry, with the same concern, an overreaching executive, the emergency declaration. The commencing of the impeachment inquiry in the House, while significant, is not the only significant action Congress will take today, nor is it the only action dealing with the president's overreach. Today, the Senate will vote on President Trump's national emergency declaration, which he is using to steal money from our military in order to fund a border wall. Rather than accept the reality that a bipartisan majority has repeatedly rejected this idea, and after dragging the country through the longest government shutdown in American history when he didn't get his way, President Trump deliberately circumvented Congress. Democrats universally opposed the president's outrageous decision to declare a national emergency. So let me direct my remarks this morning to my Republican colleagues. There are two crucial reasons for my Republican colleagues to vote to terminate this emergency. First, the vote today is the surest and likely the only way to restore funding the president has stolen from our troops and military projects across the country. President Trump promised Mexico would pay for the wall, not American taxpayers, and certainly not the military, the men and women and their families involved in keeping our nation secure. President Trump broke that promise, and now over 120 military projects hang in the balance. A middle school for military families in Kentucky, medical facilities in North Carolina, a hurricane relief project.
And that's Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader of the Senate, speaking about today's developments, calling for upholding the rule of law. It's a common refrain we've heard from Democrats. We're also getting some reaction in from some Republicans. Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy in the House of Representatives just speaking out a moment ago on Twitter, also saying that this is the Democrats trying to undo the 2016 election. But so far, Terry Moran, Republicans aren't commenting, very few commenting on the actual substance of this quite striking memorandum of this phone call.
Well, they're probably digesting it. They're reaching out, I'm sure, to the Trump White House and the Department of Justice and Department of State and Rudy Giuliani, saying, what really went down here? What can we say? What can you give us to persuade us that the president was in the right here? The president is tweeting out all kinds of things. They want to see facts and evidence, as I think most people in the country do. And there will be a key moment later today when the president of the Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, appears with President Trump. And there's no question President Zelensky of Ukraine will be asked, did you feel pressured? Do you think this conversation, which we're now hearing about, was the president trying to muscle you to help his political interests in exchange for the release of American military aid? He will be asked that, and he will probably say, I didn't feel pressured at all. We know that. He's already said that in Ukraine. And the question is, how much of a probative difference will that make? How much of a difference will that make to people who are trying to figure out, is the president abusing his power here, when the other party in the conversation is going to say, no, I didn't feel pressured at all?
Right. It's a subjective measure of whether or not there was pressure, but certainly the words on this in this document are quite compelling, quite damning to many, and certainly some more surprising than we were led to believe at first. You're looking at a live picture of President Trump at the United Nations at this hour. He's going to be in New York for most of the day. I want to bring in Jordan Phelps again because she's up there covering the president on the road. Jordan, just to continue laying out the day, Terry talked about this meeting with the Ukrainian president. Certainly going to be something to watch later this afternoon here on ABC News Live. And then President Trump will cap his day, his trip to New York, with a full-fledged press conference.
Yeah, Devin, it is going to be a busy day up here in New York. This press conference that President Trump had planned was already on the agenda before all of this broke. So was that meeting with the president of Ukraine. But Devin, it takes on a whole new significance, of course, now that this is the crux of what the president is now being investigated for potential articles of impeachment. Devin, it is going to be an unbelievable day up here watching the president. It's hard to imagine the president getting questions on anything other than this issue. Devin, stay tuned. It's going to be another wild ride.
And after the president gets his moment in the spotlight at the podium on camera later today, all eyes will return to Washington and Capitol Hill, Jack, because this drama this week continues tomorrow. This is a historic week here. After hearing from the Speaker, hearing from the President, we will hear tomorrow from the Director of National Intelligence all day on Capitol Hill about this whistleblower, why he didn't turn over the whistleblower report to Congress, what's in the report.
Right, and so, yeah, he's going to face some tough questions about what caused him to hold all that information back, to keep it from Congress, and members of Congress insist that the statute demands that he turn it over. But releasing this transcript takes a lot of pressure off of him, because he until today, he was not in a position to talk about this stuff openly. Now it's out there, and they're going to have to press him on this, too.
It's going to be a dramatic week here in Washington, and then Congress heads for a recess, we think, for 2 weeks. So an explosive end to this chapter in this ongoing drama. But Terry Moran, as we begin to wrap up our coverage, I do want to come back to you to ask a little bit about what's next in the impeachment process. This is, we've been talking about the investigation, talking about the facts, talking about how this is a political tool, but where do we go from here? What actually happens as Nancy Pelosi charts this course?
I think the next big marker are these congressional hearings. How they will go forward is at the moment unclear because, as we've said, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi didn't appoint one select committee, but she's using the committees already investigating President Trump. But the next really big moment will be when the House committee has before it witnesses who can help us understand what's going on in this transcript beyond the words, which, as you say, to many Democrats look very, very damning indeed. And say, for example, the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, now a private citizen, not on the best terms with President Trump, would have been listening in on this phone call. That's standard practice. The National Security Advisor listens in on president's calls with world leaders. What did he think? What was going on there? What did the president say before that call? What did the president say after that call? There'll be witnesses like that. I think when you see those congressional hearings, that will either move the ball down the field toward impeachment or change what feels to me right now like the momentum for an impeachment, not just an inquiry, but a vote in the House of Representatives sometime in the next couple of months. So look for that, and look for a ferocious counterattack, as always, by President Trump and his allies. They will point out that Ukraine was, in fact, the national security interest of the United States. It's corruption. Ukraine meddled in the 2016 election. There were contacts between the Democratic Party and Ukrainian officials who didn't want Donald Trump. They thought he was too close to the Kremlin. So expect a lot more argument, but look for the facts. Listen to the witnesses. Keep your powder dry.
It's the time for the public to make up their own minds as the facts are put on display, Terry, in those hearings and as the documents come out. Thank you so much for that analysis, Terry Moran, our chief national correspondent. President Trump just moments ago weighing in on these developments on camera from the United Nations. Let's listen in on that.
The letter was a great letter, meaning the letter revealing the call. That was done at the insistence of myself and other people that read it. It was a friendly letter. There was no pressure. The way you had that built up, that call, it was going to be the call from hell. It turned out to be a nothing call, other than a lot of people said, I never knew you could be so nice. So part of the problem you have is you have the fake news. You have a lot of corrupt reporting. You have some very fine reporters and journalists, but you have a lot of corrupt reporters, a lot of corrupt journalists. I would rate you right in there, by the way.
That's President Trump in New York at the United Nations, where he will spend his day today weighing in. He's referring to a letter, but we think he's talking about this phone call, which is now a 5-page document. Jordan Phelps, final thought from you, our White House reporter on the scene up there. We've talked, you and I, so much over the past 24 hours about public opinion here. Terry alluded to it. You've looked at the numbers. By the last ABC poll, public support for the impeachment process has been pretty low.
Yeah, Devin, public support hasn't necessarily gotten to where the House Democrats now are, which is moving full steam ahead with pursuing the possibility of impeachment. But Devin, the Democrats are clearly going down that road with the assumption that the public will be following them, that they, as the elected representatives of their constituency, will be following behind, that they will be building this case to the American public, that the president has committed an egregious offense here that is impeachable. Devin, just a quick thought on the president's remarks there at the UN. The president is saying that this was a nothing call and that the only feedback he's heard from people is that they didn't know he could be so nice. Devin, this is some really difficult spin for the president to make. It's hard to see who's going to take the president's spin on this one, because we have now seen this memorandum. We see the president there asking the president of Ukraine for a favor. Devin, the president's memorandum here builds this case sufficient for Democrats to move forward. Yesterday, there was question that Nancy Pelosi had moved too quickly before reading the transcript of the call. Now we have seen this memorandum, and it seems that this will only embolden their efforts.
All right, Jordan Phelps, White House reporter, thank you so much. We'll check back with you today, Jordan. And Jack Date, our senior justice producer, let's go closing thought to you. This is a major moment right here.
It's a major moment. You know, the president talked, as he often does, about fake news, but these are his facts. You know, this came from note takers in the White House Situation Room. These are his words. And they're a big problem for him right now. And how he explains this and how his Republican allies explain this, it's going to be a big challenge.
And we should say the full document is at abcnews.com. You can read it for yourself. It's an unredacted, unclassified memorandum of a telephone conversation. You're seeing some of the excerpts here on the screen. You can read the president's conversation. It was 30-minute conversation back in July at the center of this controversy today. Stay with us here at ABC News Live. It's a big day here in Washington as this impeachment fight heats up and the more details in this investigation come out. Jack Date, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We're going to throw it over now to my colleague Kimberly Brooks in New York for our continuing coverage here on ABC News Live in the debrief. Stay with us. We'll be back this afternoon for more of the news events here in Washington as well. Kimberly, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Devin. Yes, you guys are watching the debrief. And if you're joining us right now, lots of breaking news, as you just heard. The White House releasing a 5-page memo of an unredacted 30-minute phone call in July where President Trump asked the president of Ukraine to investigate a political rival. So as you know, President Trump is the 45th president of the United States, but he made history yesterday as the 4th president to have calls for impeachment from the House of Representatives. And he spoke earlier about all of this, so let's take a listen to it.
The letter was a great letter, meaning the letter revealing the call. That was done at the insistence of myself and other people that read it. It was a friendly letter. There was no pressure. The way you had that built up, that call, it was going to be the call from hell. It turned out to be a nothing call, other than a lot of people said, I never knew you could be so nice. So part of the problem you have is you have the fake news. You have a lot of corrupt reporting. You have some very fine reporters and journalists, but you have a lot of corrupt reporters, a lot of corrupt journalists. I would rate you right in there, by the way.
All right, so we have full team coverage, and I want to begin with our chief justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, who was actually there this morning when this memo was released. Pierre, I just want to hear what your thoughts are, because this memo sounds like the president's actions very unambiguous. Everything's clear.
Well, the one thing that jumps out from the transcript that we were able to review and is now publicly available is that the President of the United States did directly ask the President of Ukraine to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, and his son. He asked him to investigate, and it's clear. He invokes the name of Rudy Giuliani. His personal attorney says he is going to be involved. He also invokes the name of the Attorney General of the United States as well.
And Pierre,
so it's pretty clear that, you know, it's unambiguous. That's the thing that jumps out about the situation.
Was it surprising to you to see that the Attorney General was in this document?
Well, I think a lot of people were surprised by the fact that the president is essentially acting as if that he is going to direct the attorney general to call the president of the Ukraine and get him involved in this. And the attorney general is supposed to have a level of independence. So it's very, very clear that this will be a subject of great concern from Congress. They're going to probably be calling the attorney general up to ask him about this. There are questions about the whole sequence involving Rudy Giuliani as well. And the other big headline here as well is that, as you recall, the Inspector General of the intelligence community was the one who first saw this complaint from the whistleblower. And when the Inspector General did a review of this complaint, the Inspector General ultimately concluded that it was credible and of urgent concern. We now know that the Inspector General, in addition to wanting Congress to review this matter, he also sent a referral over to the Department of Justice and to the FBI asking that the President of the United States be investigated for a possible campaign finance violation. So the system was stressed at the highest level. The Justice Department did a review, ultimately decided that there should not be a further investigation, that there was no campaign finance violation, but I don't know if Congress is going to accept no for an answer on this issue.
Yeah, so the memo of the phone call has been released, but do we know if this whistleblower complaint is going to be released as well?
Well, that is a matter of debate. It has to be declassified before it is released. There are some indications that the White House might go ahead and release it. There's also a question about whether the Inspector General's review is going to be released as well. So lots of unanswered questions, but we did get an answer to the question of, did the president put pressure on the president of Ukraine to investigate his rival, Joe Biden? And the answer to that is a categorical yes, that did happen.
All right, so I want to bring in Catherine Falders and John Santucci in our D.C. bureau. And John, I just want to get your thoughts on this. You know, how is the president going to be able to say whether this is national interest or personal interest?
I think that is one of the $64 million questions, and God knows we have a lot of them today. First and foremost, I think the most important thing that we took away from our briefings that we received prior to this release is that for everyone telling us over the last couple of days, Catherine, that this was not going to be that big of a deal from the White House's perspective, were they reading the same document we were? Because time and time again here, and 8 times, we are seeing the pressure leveled on the Ukrainian president by President Trump. Now, he doesn't say it directly, but says it'd be great if you could look into this. It'd be great if you work with Rudy Giuliani in this. That William Barr, the Attorney General, which was someone we did not know from our reporting over the last couple of days that was going to be in here, is mentioned in this document, Catherine.
Right. I think that's significant that the president repeatedly suggests that he will have the Department of Justice work with Rudy Giuliani in order to investigate this. I know that already Democrats on Capitol Hill are jumping on that. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, has come out and said that Bill Barr should recuse himself. So you will continue to see calls from the Hill on that, too. That is one of the main things that they're focusing on.
And really the paragraph that I think, Kim, is the most damning here, and I know we have it up, hopefully we can show it on screen, is really, for those following along with us, the top of page 4, and this is where I'm going to pick it up. This is the president speaking. He says there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and that a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do, referring to the president of Ukraine, with the attorney general, Bill Barr, would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, again, speaking to the president of Ukraine, President Trump says it sounds horrible to me. That is going to be one of many sentences we're going to see House Democrats and congressional investigators latch onto. We've already seen reporting out there from other outlets that Democrats want to bring Rudy Giuliani up to Capitol Hill. And most interesting to me as well, I know I'm saying that a lot because there's a lot of things interesting to me in this document, Kim. Rudy Giuliani's name is first brought up by the president of Ukraine. And he tells President Trump that his assistant had direct conversations with Rudy Giuliani prior to this July phone call, Kim.
Absolutely. I'm also curious, how much of the focus do you think will be on Joe Biden? Obviously, everyone's poring over the details of this call, but, you know, people might also wonder what actually happened with Joe Biden for it to even come up.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a case to be made in the reporting that we've done surrounding Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, but I think that there will be significant attention on the fact that regardless of who did what, is that the President of the United States is asking his personal attorney and the Department of Justice to look into a political rival, essentially. So I think that will be the focus. Now, whether the focus is on the investigation of Biden in general and what he did, that's to be determined, but that's what Congress is focusing on.
But I do think we're going to have to see what the playbook here is for both sides of the aisle, right? Because we haven't really seen any Republicans come out and condemn the president. The farthest we've seen anyone go is former Massachusetts governor and current Utah Senator Mitt Romney saying that he was deeply troubled by his initial read of the transcript. Other than that, we've not really seen anyone come out and say trouble. But it will be interesting that if Republicans use this impeachment fight, Kim, to go after Biden in it, that's definitely going to call into question where the priorities are. Because again, this is in black and white. We can see right here what this phone call is and what President Trump said and what he did not say.
And just one more point on that, I think, and Pierre was touching on this a little bit, but what our sources, what you and I have been reporting, John, I think we also need to see that complaint. What our sources tell us, it's going through a declassification process. They want to be transparent and release it, but we need to see what from that complaint was so troubling to the whistleblower, what they overheard, if they overheard a comment, and how it relates to that transcript. Once we put all the pieces of the puzzle together, perhaps the calculus shifts on Capitol Hill even stronger.
And then to see if the whistleblower actually goes up to Capitol Hill and testify. Their lawyers have offered that. Congress has wanted them. And now, Kim, our understanding from our reporting is that the White House has no intention at this moment to continue to block the whistleblower. They will allow that individual to go up and cooperate with the congressional inquiry that's being launched.
All right, John and Catherine, I want you to stick with us, but I want to move on for just a second because the Speaker of the House has launched this formal impeachment inquiry, and a lot of people hear the word impeachment and they think that this could be the end of the presidency, but there is a process, and it doesn't always mean that a president is being removed. So I want to bring in Elaine Kamar from the Brookings Institute to explain how these votes actually work in Congress. Elaine?
Yes, hi, thank you. It's a little bit confusing, but actually it's fairly straightforward. There are 6 committees that are involved in investigating the president. Those committees will make findings, and the Judiciary Committee will then turn those into what are called articles of impeachment. And each of those articles of impeachment will eventually be voted on by the full House of Representatives. In past impeachments, for instance, some of the articles have not made it over to the Senate. In other words, the House took some and rejected some. So that will be the step. Those will be the steps that take place, let's say, in the next month or two. The minute articles of impeachment are passed by the House of Representatives, they move to the Senate, and all business stops in the Senate. This is very important because this then takes precedence over any other business. So the Senate can't delay action on impeachment. Business stops and a trial proceeds with the president's lawyers there and with the lawyers for the House of Representatives representing sort of the prosecution. And that trial has to begin, that process begins very, very quickly. No other business goes on because obviously the framers of the Constitution realized that if you were going to be involved in impeachment, you had to get to it pretty quickly rather than holding the country in a sort of a never land for months or years. So this will move pretty quickly once they write articles of impeachment and then vote on them.
Yes, I think that's very important to understand. So it is a process, and as we said, it doesn't necessarily mean that the president will be removed from office. So I want to thank Elaine for breaking that down for us. And I want to bring in Terry Moran because, Terry, you have covered these impeachments before. There's been Richard Nixon, who resigned. There was Andrew Johnson back in the day, but you covered Clinton. So what do you think of this coming up again, 4th time?
Well, the first thing to say is that impeachment is a trauma for the country. The impeachment of a president is a national trauma. There's nothing, it's not a game show. It's not a partisan fight. It is a trauma. It is the nuclear weapon in the Constitution, and the American people have from the very beginning understood that. They've understood how serious a matter it is to overturn an election. Impeachment and removing a president from office would overturn a presidential election, and that is one reason, that seriousness, that's one reason we have never done it. No president has been impeached and removed from office ever. Richard Nixon resigned when smoking gun evidence came up, and he didn't have the will or the support to fight it. But it shows how serious it is, and the American people understand that. So one thing is that this is very serious business. And the other thing is that it will, as Elaine just said, dominate our agenda to the exclusion of almost everything else. We now know that during the Clinton impeachment, when the country was consumed with the blue dress and Monica Lewinsky and the rest of it, Al-Qaeda was incubating its 9/11 plot, and maybe we took the eye off the ball. Maybe we in the media, maybe the Congress, maybe the president, maybe no one was really defending the country because we were so busy getting wrapped up in impeachment. So the final thing I would say is that electing a president is the one thing Americans do together politically. It's the only thing that we all do together. We all decide, we fight, we argue. People vote one way or another way, and we get a president. That is a national act. Removing a president also must be a national act. It cannot be partisan. And at the end of the day, the people to watch are those people in your community, in the country at large, in the Congress, who are kind of in the middle, take this pretty seriously, and aren't going to go to their corners right away and fight like they do on cable news and Twitter. Those are the people who hold the balance of power for this president, should this proceed forward based on facts and evidence toward impeachment and a trial.
And Terry, just before you go, you know, when you were covering the Clinton impeachment, that took roughly 3 months from start to finish to get to the votes. But what happens if this process goes into an election year?
Well, it'll be the issue of the election, to the exclusion of health care, to the exclusion of gun control, to the exclusion of the foreign policy of the United States. It will dominate the election. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. People will want to hear candidates' plans for health care. They care about that, about education, child care, all these things. But there's no question that the political energies of the country will get wrapped up on this should it proceed forward to impeachment. And so there's a cost to impeachment. It is incredibly divisive, incredibly traumatic, and it does represent the ultimate sanction the Constitution has politically. We should be careful with it, and I think that's the attitude of most Americans.
All right, Terry Moran right there. Thank you so much for breaking that down. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm with Jordan Phelps right now. I'm going to come back to you in just a second, but I want to go to Meredith McGraw, who's at the White House, just to see what the president was tweeting this morning about all of this. Meredith.
Hi there. President Trump is continuing to call this a witch hunt, saying that there's no quid pro quo. He said just earlier in a meeting on Venezuela that there was nothing inappropriate about this phone call that he had. And the White House, President Trump, and even his campaign are trying to paint this as a political win. They hope that impeachment could work to their advantage in 2020. But behind the scenes, there really are concerns about what this transcript really might mean for him politically. I talked to a White House official last night who said there was, quote, much ado about nothing with this transcript, but it actually paints a very different picture. And the president is at UNGA today. He's going to be repeatedly asked about this phone call, but we'll have to see exactly how this plays out for him.
Yeah, and I just want to ask, obviously the Democrats have been making a lot of noise, but not much noise from the Republicans. So any more word from his base?
Well, I thought it was so interesting yesterday and actually extraordinary that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell unanimously passed a resolution calling on the Trump administration to release that whistleblower complaint to congressional intelligence committees. And as has been reported by our team, the White House is considering making that happen. It's going through a declassification process right now. But Republicans on the Hill are going to have to stomach this, as are President Trump's supporters. And the
RNC said that they've raised $1 million off of this, but that was before the transcript itself came out, and people had the chance to see for themselves exactly what President Trump had to say on that phone call with the Ukrainian president.
All right, Meredith McGraw right there at the White House. And as I said, I want to turn to Jordan. Jordan, you've been covering the president at the United Nations. It's just kind of hard to imagine that he can have any conversation with world leaders when this is hanging in the balance.
Kimberly, this is completely overshadowing the president's official agenda here at UNGA. He had a meeting this morning about Venezuela. We aren't getting any coverage today about what happened in that meeting other than the president's response on Ukraine. And then, Kimberly, this afternoon, you can't make this stuff up. The president is actually sitting down with the president of Ukraine, who, of course, is at the center of this whole controversy. That meeting, of course, was on the agenda before this story blew up as it has. It's almost like a TV show could be written around this script. Kimberly, that is going to be a wild event. There are going to be reporters in the room there jostling to ask questions of both President Trump and President Zelensky about this issue. And then, Kimberly, we're going to get even more questions from President Trump later this afternoon when he holds what will be a freewheeling, crazy, I'm sure, press conference that's going to cap up UNGA. But of course, it's hard to see that any questions on the president's formal agenda will make it into the script at that press conference.
Yeah, it's almost like, can it get any more chaotic than it already is?
It can't.
Didn't think it was possible. But you said that President Trump was also tweeting about the Speaker of the House today, yes?
Yeah, the president is there on Twitter trolling the Speaker of the House now that she's moved forward with this impeachment inquiry, something she has been so reluctant to do, Kimberly. So it's really remarkable to see her taking this step. The president tweeting out a video of Nancy Pelosi back during the Clinton impeachment, saying that Republicans, at that time, were impeaching not on the basis of fairness, but with a vengeance. And she said that Republicans were paralyzed with hatred for President Clinton, and that was what was going on there. The president obviously now trying to turn Nancy Pelosi's words on their head and trying to turn this into Pelosi doing the same thing that Republicans were doing to President Clinton at the time. It is going to be a very heated political battle ahead, of course, Kimberly.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to Catherine Faulders in our D.C. bureau because, Catherine, there's a new tweet from Representative Adam Schiff.
Yeah, Schiff, the House Intelligence Committee, I'm pulling up the tweet now, he was saying the transcript of the call reads like a classic mob shakedown. You can see his tweet right there. We do a lot for Ukraine. There's not much reciprocity. I have a favor to ask. Investigate my opponent. My people will be in touch. Now, I'll mention that Adam Schiff yesterday was in a meeting with Speaker Pelosi when she was meeting with the chairs of these committees that are investigating the president before making her announcement. So Adam Schiff and people like Chairman Nadler were in that meeting. And just to kind of come back, John, we were talking about this a little bit, to how this will play out. The Speaker has told these 6 chairs to continue their investigative work and to turn over their evidence, at least from what my sources are telling me, to the House Judiciary Committee, which would then refer articles of impeachment to the full House after they've gathered all that evidence. And I was just speaking with a source a second ago who said that the House Judiciary Democrats are going to meet this evening. It's a previously scheduled meeting, but in that meeting there will be some talk about the way forward here.
Yeah, and so, John, Devin was in New York yesterday, and one of the things he brought up that I thought was really interesting is that this incident is digestible because it's just one phone call, as opposed to the Mueller report that was like 22 months of lots of layers that people maybe weren't able to break down in their heads. But just to keep everyone on the same page, if you can just give us a timeline of how this all went down from the start of the complaint all the way to this inquiry.
I'm sorry, I had a little bit of PTSD there when you said Mueller. Just I think that was a few months ago.
Yes.
But anyway, moving on to this. Yeah, I do think this is a little more digestible, but it's still going on. So let's go back to June. This is when the Department of Defense first announced $250 million in aid for Ukraine. And then we learned in the middle of July, and we actually just learned this, Kim, in the last couple of days, that President Trump instructed White House Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney to put a hold on that money. So June 18th, the money money is put aside, ready to go. Trump, middle of July, says hold tight, don't do it, and has Mulvaney step in. Then at the end of the month, on the 25th, the president has that call, which we've now obtained the transcript of, with the new president of Ukraine, Zelensky. And on that phone call, as we've now learned from the transcript, they are obviously discussing an investigation into former Vice President Joe Biden. So let's fast forward here. The next month rolls along into August, and that's when the whistleblower, who has not been identified yet, but that individual files their complaint with the intelligence community and the Inspector General. At the end of August, the Inspector General's team passes the complaint to the new Director of National Intelligence, and then in September, Kim, that is when the deadline passes for the DNI to alert Congress about this whistleblower report, and of course we learn about it in the coming weeks, first reported by the Washington Post. But I do think here this is where we're going to have to figure out what happened in the course of the IG getting involved, because after that deadline passes, the Inspector General is expressing concern to the House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff, who obviously Catherine just heard from, and then one day later, on September 10th, Kim, Schiff actually pens a formal request for the full whistleblower complaint. And the next day, the Trump administration agrees to release previously frozen aid money to Ukraine. But it's from September 10th to where we are now that things have sort of gotten mucked up. Because remember, we learned about this first at the end of last week. We were not hearing anything from the White House or allies close to the president. We were hearing they were looking into the matter. Now we've started to see the dam break into them doing something. So first things first was the transcript. We now have that. Now the things we have to wait for is the complaint. We are told by our sources that the White House is not standing in the way. They are working on a declassification process to turn that over to Congress, we expect, as soon as the end of this week. The last piece of that puzzle is what happens to the whistleblower. Does the whistleblower go and appear before members of Congress, meet with congressional investigators? We are told, Catherine and I, by our sources, that the White House will not stand in the way of that matter, and they will allow the whistleblower to go up to Capitol Hill.
And John, I think it's important to hit on, as you have, is that we have the transcript, we'll have the complaint, the paper will be out there. We have the acting DNI before the committee, the House Intel Committee, tomorrow. But this isn't done, obviously, from the Capitol Hill side, but not just as it relates to impeachment, but the investigative angle of this. You're going to see more subpoenas for Rudy Giuliani and for the State Department, for example.
But the other thing I think is really important here, Kim, just for our viewers, look at that timeline we just ran through, right? Because the idea of Mulvaney stopping the aid, we had actually heard of that over the last couple of days, but that was not part of the initial reporting. There's a lot more work to be done here, and I do think sort of what is going to come from this transcript is what happened after this phone call. Did the president pick up the phone and maybe have a conversation with Rudy Giuliani? Did Attorney General William Barr have any conversations directly with Ukraine, like President Trump is encouraging President Zelensky to do here? There's a lot of things we need to follow up on, a lot of threads to be pieced together, and frankly, a lot of holes in this timeline that we're going to have to figure out.
That's right. Yes, Congress is going to be very busy. I want to thank John.
So are we, Kim.
Absolutely, definitely you will be. John Santucci and Catherine Falders in our D.C. bureau, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim.
Yes, good to see you guys. So, Jordan, I want to come back to you before we wrap this up. President Trump called it the perfect call. He called it the perfect call, and here we are.
Yeah, Kimberly, it's hard to see who's going to swallow the president's spin on this one because we have now seen that memorandum, and it shows the president directly asking for a favor. But Kimberly, as we move forward, you know, impeachment is at its heart a political fight. So not only in the sense that Congress is making this political calculation of whether or not these high crimes and misdemeanors, if they meet that bar by their own political definition, if that's great enough to move forward with articles of impeachment, but also out there in the bigger sense, we're entering a campaign year. So this is going to be the dominant issue on the campaign trail. We've been talking a lot about where is the American public on this. We see Democrats in Congress kind of leading the way for their constituents with moving ahead for this. But Kimberly, as this moves out to the campaign trail, we're going to actually see how voters are responding to this, whether it actually backfires on Democrats or whether it helps them. Nancy Pelosi has been so cautious until now because she knows that impeachment is a double-edged sword. It can both help or hurt her caucus, and we're going to find out.
We will find out. Jordan Phillips, I have to say, good to see you in New York
So good to be
instead of D.C., so I hope you come back often. And guys, if you can even believe it, we're turning to another embattled leader with chaotic politics. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson back in the UK after the Supreme Court ruled his 5-week suspension was illegal. So I want to bring in Julia McFarlane with the latest. Julia, good to see you. So he flew back from New York today, and he had a phone call with the Queen.
Hey, Kimberly, exactly. It was that bombshell Supreme Court ruling yesterday, as you said, that found his suspension of Parliament unlawful. It sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom that were felt across the Atlantic Ocean, of course, as Boris Johnson was forced to cut short his trip to the US and come back to the UK to face the music this morning. One political observer on Twitter noting that broadcasters had chartered helicopters to follow the Prime Minister's car, tracking his journey from Heathrow Airport back to Westminster like he was O.J. Simpson. Now, he is due to speak in the House of Commons in just a few minutes, and he will be facing an incredibly hostile crowd of lawmakers all morning since MPs have come back to Parliament. There have been calls for him to stand down immediately. Politicians have called him a disgrace. He's been called a zombie prime minister by the Scots. Now, the PM's options are running out because we, of course, have that Halloween Brexit deadline. The Attorney General this morning hinting that the government wants one last attempt to try and get a general election to try and strengthen the prime minister's hands. So, I mean, Kimberly, if things start to get a little bit quiet over there in Washington, I can guarantee you the next few weeks here in the UK, we can keep you very, very busy and entertained over here.
Oh, my goodness. I don't think we can keep up. I really don't think we can keep up. Julia McFarlane in our London bureau, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And guys, if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines and all of the chaos going down today, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app, the ABC News app. But you need to stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And again, download the app or go to the website if you want the latest headlines and updates. So thanks for joining us today. Jordan, good to see you. And I will see you tomorrow.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. We have just come from our conference and really focused on the discussion about what the Speaker of the House and the House Democrats did yesterday. And, you know, we have watched now, ever since President Trump was elected, the House Democrats have been careening from impeachment theory to impeachment theory. They've careened from target to target for a while. 10 days or so ago, they were focused on impeaching Justice Kavanaugh. Now they're back to focusing on President Trump. But what we see repeatedly is a complete lack of focus on, concern about evidence and facts. And what Speaker Pelosi did yesterday really was the worst we've seen yet, where she announced an impeachment inquiry without any evidence, without seeing the transcript of the phone call at issue, without seeing any details from the supposed whistleblower. And when you think about what that does, both from the perspective of our constitutional obligation and from the perspective of our national security, it ought to give every American grave concerns that they are dealing with this in a way that is absolutely such a flagrant disregard of their constitutional responsibility. When Speaker Pelosi went out yesterday and announced that there would be an impeachment inquiry of the President of the United States, at that moment, our president was up in New York at the General Assembly, and he was there having meetings, as presidents do during those sessions, bilateral meetings with other heads of state. There was absolutely no justification to launch this impeachment inquiry at all. No reason she had to do it yesterday. One can only guess that she did it because she was intentionally trying to weaken the president, trying to weaken his hand as he's dealing with crucial issues of national security with our allies and some of our adversaries. So it was an absolute disgrace. We're now in a situation where not only have they hurt national security, but they're fundamentally abdicating their constitutional responsibility. Impeachment is a very solemn, grave responsibility we all have. And for this speaker to be going down this path, and for the Democratic caucus to be going down this path before they have seen any evidence at all, is something that I think is absolutely unprecedented in our history. So I would like to now turn things over to the Republican leader of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Collins, to discuss this further.
Thank you. What we're seeing is a continuation of just complete, utter disrespect for this House. What we have seen over the past little bit, especially with the Speaker yesterday, jumping to conclusions. It is amazing that what we are seeing coming out of this is taking hearsay, taking stuff you've not read and saying it's going to be impeachment inquiry. I have one news flash for the Speaker. She's not doing an impeachment inquiry. She's not doing the steps that it actually takes. It's just another decision by this Speaker and the House Democrats to disregard over 200 years of precedent in this House, where we actually have rules. We actually have things that matter, and they are so bent on getting at this president, especially while he was in New York City doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. It's just amazing to me. But I think our caucus chair was too kind. But I'm going to say this. They're more like Plinko. You ever watch the old game Plinko? This is the way they're treating impeachment. They just drop the thing in and see which way it bounces. Well, first it was Mueller. First it was this. First it was Amaya. And they just trying to hit the imaginary target of getting rid of a president that they don't like. You don't do it this way. And what we saw on the House floor, in the House yesterday, and the discussions around that, when people talk about an impeachment inquiry, they talk about a speaker who's lost control of her own conference. We talk about a speaker who's lost control of the facts. We've talked about a speaker who no longer can honestly stand before the American people and honestly be a voice for her party or for reason. Because what they're supposed to be doing, they're not doing. And when they actually attack on a hearsay, when they attack with not even seeing, it just shows how desperate they have become. And when they become that desperate, it leads to a dysfunction in our committees. We've seen that, and I know Leader Jordan here is going to speak in just a minute from his committee perspective, but we saw this in our committee perspective. Just a week ago, the Democrats allowed a Democrat donor, a large Democrat donor, to break the rules of this House and question Corey Lewandowski for 30 minutes. And there's almost been crickets that was okay. It was not okay. When you break the rules of the House, when you go against that because you're so desperate to pin everything on a president, that is when it's become a disgrace. The Democrats now have frankly fallen to a disgraceful status. They need to explain to the American people why they've chose to trash the House instead of build up the American people and help this president when he is wanting to put America first.
Well, let me just say, Conference Chair Cheney was exactly right. Yesterday was an unbelievable day to see the Speaker of the House do what she did about a document that she hadn't even seen. And my guess is because they are so focused on attacking the individual the American people made president of the United States that they're looking for anything and everything. The Michael Cohen hearing didn't work for them. The John Dean hearing didn't work for them. The Mueller report and Mueller hearing didn't work for them. The Lewandowski hearing didn't work for them. So let's do a press conference and let's talk about something we haven't even seen, because maybe that'll work. That's how desperate and ridiculous this has gotten, and I think the American people see through it. They see clearly the job that this president has done, and they appreciate that, and they think what the Democrats are doing is ridiculous. And frankly, the precedent it sets is dangerous as well. So, look, we'll look at the document, but I think the facts are that they got nothing else, and they're doing the kind of things that they did yesterday. 160 some Democrats, I think, are wanting to move forward about something they haven't even read, haven't even seen. I don't know that we've ever seen that in the history of the Congress. So with that, I'll yield to our leader, who's doing a great job leading our team, and that's Chairman McCarthy.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Steve.
Steve, I'm sorry. He's doing a good job, too.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Jim. Yesterday was a low point in Nancy Pelosi's speakership. And when you see a Speaker of the House come forward and accuse a president of the United States of breaking the law to the level that it should meet the definition in the Constitution of high crimes and misdemeanor, without even being able to name the crime, without having even read the report that she's basing this wild and irresponsible accusation on, is the height of irresponsibility for Speaker of the House to do that. And unfortunately, we've seen this drumbeat towards impeachment from her conference since the day Donald Trump got elected. They made it clear first with the resist movement that they didn't want to acknowledge he was elected. He was duly elected by the people of this country. There's an election next year where we can hash out who's going to be the next president. And when Donald Trump's reelected, who knows if they'll continue to go down that road. But the fact that they're using this majority to try to undo the results of the 2016 election is disgraceful. They can't name a high crime and misdemeanor. If you're going to base it on a press report from a second-hand person that thinks they heard something, and that's the most you've got, to claim that crimes were committed, this is a serious responsibility that the Congress has. Only 3 times in the history of our country has a House of Representatives brought forward articles of impeachment. Yet Jerry Nadler, when he took the chairmanship of the committee just a few weeks ago, said that he wants to bring articles of impeachment to the House floor by the end of this year. And when you ask them, what are those articles of impeachment? They can't name a single one. They thought the Mueller report was going to produce impeachable evidence, and it didn't. In fact, it showed the president didn't collude. And so instead of dropping it and actually focusing on the real problems this country faces, instead of bringing the USMCA bill to the floor, which would pass and create over 160,000 new jobs in America, which has broad support, Republicans and Democrats, labor unions, and trade groups. Instead of doing those kind of things, lowering prescription drug prices, when we've brought bills out of committee unanimously to lower prescription drug prices, which is a major problem that families are facing. Those bills could be signed into law today, creating new jobs and lowering drug prices for Americans. But instead, late Nancy Pelosi is wasting her speakership trying to undo the results of the 2016 election by impeaching the president with no basis. Now, if you look at the Constitution, it gives the House of Representatives the ability to impeach a president for crimes. It's a check on the executive. And instead, Nancy Pelosi is using impeachment as a check on the electorate because she doesn't agree with the results of the 2016 election where people actually elected Donald Trump president. There is going to be an election next year, and we can litigate all of the differences between a conservative, pro-business approach to free market enterprise versus socialism. And clearly they're moving towards socialism. But to abuse the power of the House and the speakership by trying to go after a president even when there's no basis of fact that she can name. She cannot name one high crime and misdemeanor, and yet she still wants to move forward with impeachment. It's disgraceful. And with that, I'll bring up our leader, Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you, Steve. You know, normally in a normal Congress, we'd come here and we'd talk to you about what's going to be on the floor, what legislation is passing through committee, what problem that we're going to solve, our ability to work together. But let's see the facts of this Congress. Democrats have voted 3 times to impeach the president. Twice they voted before the Mueller report even had one word public. I just watched the speaker yesterday demean the office of the speakership. I understand members when they want to be political, but the power of the speaker is a much different place to be. I listened to the speaker claim that the president violated the law based on nothing that she had read, based upon a whistleblower that wasn't even listening to a conversation, with an IG saying that the whistleblower has political bias. I listened to Nancy Pelosi, the speaker, promise the American public, if they trusted the Democrats with the majority, that they would be different. That they'd be different this time. That they'd work to solve problems. At the same time, I watched Congressman Nadler run for a chairmanship of Judiciary. He promised his conference that he would impeach the president. The Democrats lied to the American public, but Chairman Nadler kept his promise to the Democratic conference. Make no mistake, yesterday was a dark day for America. It was a dark day for the rule of law that the Speaker of the House would claim a president violated the law without ever having any information to judge it on. It was a dark day for national security. That you were willing to jeopardize the national security of our country today and in the future because of your own political bias. Name me one world leader, regardless of who sits in the Oval Office, of how honest of a conversation they are going to have if they're fearful that the transcripts are going to become public to the world. It was a dark day for the rule of law. That a president's going to be held guilty without any proof in the process. It's a dark day for the rule of law when we watch a former vice president tell the public that he did quid pro quo, that he told another country that he would hold up $1 billion if they would not fire a prosecutor that was looking to his own son that he flew on a Air Force Two. That if they did not fire them in 6 hours, he was leaving. It is a dark day for the Congress, for the actions of this speaker, but more importantly, for the action of this majority party. They promised the American public they would be different. But USMCA is not coming to the floor. They promised the American public that they'd work together. But when we have a bipartisan prescription drug bill, they put a poison pill so it can't become law. They promised the American public that they'd protect them, but they will not improve the immigration system of America to solve the problem. They promised they would be different, and they have not. I'm not speaking to you as a Republican leader. I'm speaking to you as an American that's disgusted with what has taken place by the Speaker of the House and the action of this majority party, who is only driven because they did not like the outcome of a 2016 election. It is time to put people before politics. It is time to run by the rule of law. It is time to uphold that you look at evidence before you judge whether somebody is guilty. And you know what? It is time to stop putting the American public through this nightmare. How many more months will we have to investigate? How many more millions will we have to spend to prove that they are wrong and the election is over? I know they are better than this. I'm just asking that they act like it. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to see if you could, you've talked a lot about constitutional violations. Wanted to ask if you could respond specifically to what Speaker Pelosi said yesterday when she cited what she believes is a violation. I'll just quote from her.
Please.
From the transcript. She said, "The president has admitted to asking the president of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit him politically. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed dishonorable facts of betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of national security, betrayal of integrity of our elections." So I guess two things to focus on there. They're saying
the president did not say he did that. You have not read the transcripts, and what is being said about the transcripts, let's think what the Democrats are saying. They're claiming that the president did a quid pro quo. They're claiming that the president brought up Biden 8 different times when no one has read this transcript, and the Speaker of the House, the individual who's in line to be president if something happens to the president or the vice president, claims there's a violation of the law based upon a whistleblower of facts that she never read and a whistleblower that was not even on the phone call. Now the President of the United States is being put in a position that no other president in the history of this country has to do, that he is going to release a transcript of a conversation with another world leader so the entire world can see it, simply because they want to impeach him. He has to continue time and time again. How many millions of dollars did we go through with the Mueller report? This speaker that claims the president violated also nominated Adam Schiff, the congressman of our Intel committee, that is a gathering for our national security. This same individual, Congressman Adam Schiff, who had lied to the American public for the last 2 years, who looked into a camera and said he had proof beyond circumstantial evidence. Well, you know what? We spent millions of dollars, more than a year. We went around the world from our very best people from the FBI and others, and they found that was a lie. But he's still sitting at the helm of a chairmanship dealing with the national security. And at the same time the speaker sits there, she listened to a vice president in his own words, say that, yes, he did hold up money to Ukraine unless they would fire a prosecutor that worked for Ukraine, that was looking after his son's activities. Not one word about that. No, I think what the Speaker did was a dark day, not only for this institution, but for the rule of law, and she put this country in harm's way when it comes to national security and our view around the world. At the exact same time, the leader of our country is sitting in the UN meeting with other world leaders, a challenge with Iran, a challenge with China and others. And she stands before that she's going to do a press conference all day long to say what's going to happen with impeachment. And she claims he violated the law with no proof, with no information, simply the fact that she does not like the outcome of the election. That questions her ability to even be Speaker, in my eyes. Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. First of all, do you believe that the White House should make this transcript and the whistleblower complaint public? And
They shouldn't have to, but they are.
But secondly, do you think that the White House would have done so had the Speaker not taken the action she did yesterday?
First of all, naming any president, should they have to release the transcripts of every conversation they have with another world leader? The answer should be no. But this president, based upon what this majority party has done, lying to the American public on what they would work on, you're sitting before us today where America could be stronger this month. Not only our GDP, but more than 160,000 people at the lowest level would have a job. But you know what? We're not going to pass USMCA. We've got a crisis on the border. We got a challenge when it comes to technology. Europe is acting, but is America. All that falls under the Judiciary Committee, but Nadler made a promise to his conference that he'd impeach this president. We had an IG report that looked at the DOJ. In any normal Congress, they would bring that Inspector General before that committee that has jurisdiction to see what is going on. But no, we don't have time for that. The only thing they have time for is try to change the course of a 2016 election. But you know what this president has done? He's gone beyond what any president has done before. He is now putting forth the transcript so everybody in the world can read each word that he said to another world leader. And it changes a whole different standard for us. And you know what? In the end, it will make the country less safe by the actions of this speaker. Yes. Yes, sir.
How much do you think this impeachment incident is going to re-energize the Trump base in this next election?
You know what? I'm not worried about energizing the Trump base. I'm worried about what it's doing to the fabric of America. I'm worried about what is it showing to the rest of the world. Just as we went through the Mueller report and the rest of the world had to watch as long as we, and it came back, and we found out that Adam Schiff lied to us, and that the president did nothing wrong. But at the end of the day, I think what the rest of the country want to know, why did it start? Why would any president in the future have to go through this? I'd want to know the answer to the origin of that, and I'd want to make sure it never happens to anybody. What I'm concerned now is the Speaker of the House changed the course of that office for the history of this country. That a body that brings legislation, a body that represents the rule of law, would change the course of what it actually means. To claim that a president had violated the law with no information, based it on a whistleblower she does not know that wasn't even on a phone call. To claim that the president did a quid pro quo and mentioned Biden's name 8 times. But when this transcript comes out, is it out? So I think at the end of the day, the Speaker owes an apology to this nation, and I think it's even questioned whether she should stay in her job. We are done with this.
The transcript does say that he asked to...
Good morning, everyone. We had a very robust discussion today within the caucus that was the center of the meeting, focused on the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Speaker Pelosi and Richie Neal, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, along with the Democratic Working Group, have been very clear that our goal is to get to yes and to reach an agreement with the administration that improves upon, in a meaningful way, the NAFTA agreement that is currently in place. That NAFTA agreement has resulted in the outsourcing of good-paying American jobs, hurting working families and Americans all across the country, including, but not limited to, in the heartland of America. But if we're going to renegotiate the trade agreement, our perspective is that the agreement must be meaningful if it's going to replace what is currently there. In order for that agreement to be meaningful, House Democrats have laid out 4 different issues which we discussed in the caucus today. 1, improved labor standards. 2, improved environmental standards. 3, we want to deal with the pharmaceutical issue and biologics in a responsible fashion that doesn't undermine the best interests of the American people. 4, we want to make sure that there is enforceability. Any agreement that includes improved upon labor standards and environmental standards, particularly in Mexico, must be enforceable to be meaningful. And we've made that position clear to the administration, but we also want to get to yes. And we want to get to yes because the business of the American people must be done. And we were sent to Washington in a new Democratic majority to get things done for the people, to lower health care costs, to increase pay for everyday Americans, to enact a real infrastructure plan to protect people with pre-existing conditions, and of course to also clean up corruption, which is what we are endeavoring to do so that government works and is of the people, by the people, and for the people. Later on this afternoon, Speaker Pelosi at 4 p.m. will convene a speakers meeting to discuss our drug price negotiation bill. Perhaps the top priority of House Democrats, as articulated to the American people last year and as implemented through our agenda this year, is to lower health care costs and drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs. It is unacceptable that the people in America pay more for life-saving prescription drugs than any other developed nation in the world. We pay more than Canada. We pay more than Australia. We pay more than Japan. We pay more than Germany. We pay more than France. We pay more than Great Britain. Squarely because of the anti-competitive practices of some pharmaceutical companies and the fact that the federal government is prohibited under law from negotiating lower drug prices on behalf of the American people. That is a racket, and we are prepared to break that up. The Democratic bill that we would like to secure Republican support in connection with, because they claim they want to do something about this issue, will give the federal government the ability to negotiate lower drug prices on behalf of Medicare recipients and the American people. It would be a substantial, game-changing step in the right direction. The president has claimed he wants to get that done. And so we look forward to being able to have a discussion about our bill and finding common ground on this issue on behalf of everyday Americans. Let me now yield to our distinguished Vice Chair, Catherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, our caucus is focused on the very real threats to national security. We're focused not only on those coming from the White House, but on those that are coming from the border and the approach this administration has taken to immigration. While he has stolen $3.6 billion from our military families, from the quality of their life, and from military readiness to build a wall, we have not forgotten about the immigration policy and the impact on children and migrants that threatens our security, doesn't build it. And we're passing 2 important bills this week. one by Congresswoman Veronica Escobar and one by Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, that specifically increase our ability to have objective appointments made that can make sure that we are really acting in the interest of national security and our policies at the border, and that we are getting medical screenings for the children who are coming across our borders seeking refuge here. These are two critical pieces to making sure that our immigration policy not only provides for national security, but is humane and represents those values of a country that has always been a place where people can come and seek a better life. The other issue that we continue to focus on, today there will be a large rally starting about 1 o'clock for gun safety. And we are going to keep the pressure on from the Senate to take these bills up for a vote. As we've said before, this is an issue that is really tearing at the security of our communities. We are not going to continue to let the answer be one of silence from the U.S. Senate. We are going to be there loudly today saying, do your job. Stand up for the American people and make our communities safe again. So we appreciate your attention not only to the headlines of today, but the continuing work that Democrats in the House are doing to push the agenda for the people.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You talk about firearms.